There comes a moment when even the calmest INFJ hits their emotional limit. It doesn't happen suddenly, it builds quietly, layer by layer, as they keep absorbing energy, emotions, and unspoken pain from everyone around them. To the outside world, they still look composed, smiling, listening, being the strong one. But inside, their mind is running a marathon they never signed up for. INFJs don't explode when they're overwhelmed, they implode. They withdraw, disconnect, and drift into silence, not because they don't care, but because they've cared too much for too long. Emotional overload for an INFJ isn't just exhaustion, it's the point where empathy becomes a burden and even peace feels like noise. If you've ever felt drained after helping others, numb after overfeeling everything, or distant from the world you once tried to save, this video is for you. Subscribe for more deep psychological insights about INFJs and the hidden side of their mind. And tell me in the comments, when you're emotionally overloaded, do you shut down or do you keep pretending you're fine? They withdraw without warning. When an INFJ reaches emotional overload, they don't announce it. They simply vanish. Not dramatically, not in anger, but in quiet surrender. One day they're present, deeply engaged, listening to everyone's pain and holding space for every emotion in the room. And then suddenly, they're gone. Messages go unanswered, conversations end abruptly. The warmth they once carried turns into distance. It's not rejection, it's survival. To outsiders, this withdrawal can feel confusing, even cold, but inside the INFJ, it's a storm. They've absorbed too many emotions that aren't theirs, tried to fix too many situations they didn't break, and cared beyond their capacity. Their silence isn't punishment, it's a form of detox. It's the moment they retreat to reclaim fragments of themselves scattered across everyone they've helped. They don't need attention, they need oxygen. When INFJs disappear, it's because they've been drowning in noise, expectations, and emotional weight they never asked to carry. Alone, they finally exhale. They let their mind untangle thoughts, their intuition recalibrate, their heart rest. Solitude becomes sacred, not loneliness, but medicine. It's the quiet sanctuary where they can hear their own voice again after being tuned to everyone else's frequency for too long. This withdrawal can last hours, days, or weeks, and when they return, they often seem lighter, not because everything is solved, but because they've rebuilt the boundary between empathy and exhaustion. That's the paradox of an INFJ. They need connection deeply, yet must disconnect completely to preserve it. So if an INFJ pulls away, don't chase. Don't take it personally. Their silence isn't about you, it's about equilibrium. They're learning to carry their compassion without collapsing under it. They're resetting their soul to keep feeling deeply without losing themselves in the process. Because for an INFJ, withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the quiet act of choosing self-preservation over emotional suffocation, and it's how they find the strength to come back softer, calmer, and more whole than before. They feel numb instead of emotional. When an INFJ becomes emotionally overloaded, the strangest thing happens. They stop feeling. Not because they don't care anymore, but because they've cared too much. Their system shuts down like an overworked engine, and what was once deep empathy turns into a quiet, unsettling numbness. It's the mind's last defense against emotional collapse. This isn't coldness, it's self-preservation. After absorbing everyone's pain, after trying to be the healer, the listener, the calm in every storm, something inside them clicks off. They stop reacting to things that once moved them. Music doesn't stir emotion, conversations feel shallow, even joy seems distant, like it's happening behind a glass wall. And that's what scares them most, not the sadness, but the absence of it. To an INFJ, this numbness feels wrong. They're used to being emotionally alive, feeling the world in high definition, reading every tone, every micro-expression. So when their emotional senses go quiet, they start questioning themselves. What's wrong with me? Why don't I care? But the truth is, they do. They care so much that their mind had to hit pause just to survive. In this phase, they might isolate or go through the motions of life mechanically, smiling when expected, nodding at the right times, but without their usual spark. Inside, it's like watching life through fogged glass. They crave meaning, but everything feels muted. Yet, this emotional shutdown isn't permanent. It's a recalibration. Their soul is asking for silence after drowning in noise. And when the numbness finally fades, something remarkable happens. They begin to feel again, slowly, softly, like color returning to a grayscale world. The smallest kindness warms them, a song touches them, a sunrise feels like a reset. They come back to life with deeper understanding, realizing that even numbness was a form of healing. So if you ever see an INFJ go emotionally flat, don't mistake it for indifference. Behind that calm surface is a soul that's been running on empty, quietly rebuilding its strength. Because sometimes, for an INFJ to feel everything again, they first have to feel nothing at all. They overthink every small interaction. When an INFJ is emotionally overloaded, their mind turns into a movie reel that never stops playing, replaying every word, every glance, every pause in conversation like a detective trying to solve a mystery that doesn't exist. A simple, "Hey, are you okay?" can loop in their head for hours, dissected into possible meanings, tones, and hidden intentions. To most people, small interactions are forgettable. To an INFJ, they become emotional puzzles that demand decoding. This isn't paranoia, it's empathy running wild. INFJs feel everything so vividly that even subtle shifts in someone's tone or energy can feel like alarms. A friend's silence might mean they're tired, or it might mean something's wrong. And the INFJ's mind refuses to rest until it knows which. The irony is, they often sense things others aren't even aware they're expressing. That deep intuition, while powerful, becomes exhausting when turned inward. In emotional overload, that ability becomes a curse. Every conversation becomes an analysis. Every text delay feels like a clue. They question if they said too much, too little, or the wrong thing entirely. It's not about insecurity, it's about accuracy. INFJs want harmony so badly that they can't stand the thought of unknowingly causing a ripple in someone else's heart. But the constant analysis leaves them drained, detached, and distant from the present moment. What most people don't realize is that INFJs don't overthink to control outcomes, they do it to understand meaning. They crave clarity the way others crave closure. And when clarity isn't available, they try to build it themselves, brick by mental brick, until their own mind becomes a maze. Eventually, they'll pull away, not out of anger, but to stop the noise, to stop feeling responsible for every emotional vibration in the room. And in that solitude, something shifts. They start realizing that not every silence hides rejection, not every pause means judgment, and not every distant tone needs fixing. Slowly, they release the need to decode the world and start trusting their intuition again, not as an analyst, but as an observer. Because when an INFJ learns to stop overthinking and simply feel, they rediscover the peace that analysis once stole, the peace that comes from letting life breathe without dissecting every heartbeat. They become hypersensitive to energy. When an INFJ is emotionally overloaded, their intuition shifts into overdrive. Like every emotional frequency around them suddenly turns up to full volume. They start picking up things most people never notice: the tension behind someone's smile, the heaviness in a room before anyone speaks, the unspoken disappointment lingering after a joke falls flat. It's not a choice, it's a reflex. Their emotional radar becomes so sharp that even being in a crowded place can feel like standing under a waterfall of energy they can't turn off. What others experience as a normal day feels to an INFJ like sensory chaos. They can sense who's hurting, who's hiding, who's pretending, even when everyone else is laughing. A casual conversation can feel draining because they're not just hearing the words, they're feeling the emotion behind them. It's empathy amplified to the point of exhaustion. Their heart begins to absorb energy like a sponge, and before they realize it, they're carrying emotions that don't belong to them. During these moments, the INFJ might seem quiet or withdrawn, but internally, they're overwhelmed. Every emotional signal feels louder, heavier. They start craving silence, not because they dislike people, but because their nervous system can't filter the noise anymore. Crowded rooms become unbearable. Even digital spaces, social media, messages, notifications can feel invasive. So they retreat. They disappear to recalibrate, to return to their natural emotional frequency. But what's beautiful about this hypersensitivity is that it's also their gift. Once they learn to manage it, this deep awareness becomes a compass, guiding them to truth, authenticity, and understanding that others can't perceive. They begin to see through intentions, lies, and facades with frightening accuracy. Their sensitivity, once a burden, becomes their quiet power. Still, before they reach that clarity, they need solitude, space to separate what's theirs from what's not. They might walk in nature, sit in silence, or just stare out the window, letting the noise fade. That's how an INFJ heals, by returning to emotional stillness. Because when they're balanced, their sensitivity isn't fragility, it's precision. It's the ability to feel the world so deeply that even chaos starts to make sense. But when they're overloaded, that same gift becomes a weight, one they can only lift by finding peace in the silence they were born to crave. They lose interest in conversations that once energized them. When an INFJ reaches emotional overload, something subtle but profound begins to happen. The very things that once gave them energy start to feel like obligations. Deep conversations that used to light their soul now feel heavy. Listening, once effortless, becomes work. It's not because they've stopped caring, it's because their emotional battery has nothing left to give. INFJs are naturally drawn to meaningful dialogue. They crave the kind of talks that peel back layers, that reveal truth, that make both people feel seen. But when they've spent too long carrying other people's emotions, their mind quietly shifts from curiosity to exhaustion. They start hearing the same stories, the same drama, the same emotional loops, and instead of feeling connected, they feel trapped. Their eyes may still meet yours, but their spirit is somewhere else, seeking peace. The INFJ's empathy, when stretched thin, turns conversations into emotional static. They begin scanning for authenticity, and when they don't find it, their energy retreats. Small talk feels meaningless, complaints drain them, gossip feels poisonous, even discussions they once enjoyed, philosophy, psychology, dreams, start to sound repetitive because they've analyzed every angle already. What they crave now isn't stimulation, it's silence, stillness, a place where words don't demand emotional labor. During this phase, they might withdraw without explanation. Friends notice the distance, misread it as coldness, or assume disinterest. But the truth is simpler. They're recharging in isolation, rebuilding their emotional connection to the world. They don't want to talk about feelings. They want to feel again. And that requires quiet. What most people don't realize is that INFJs don't need many conversations to feel connected. They need meaningful ones. When they've been stretched too thin, they'll disappear not because they've stopped loving people, but because they're finding their way back to authenticity. They know that when they return, every word they speak will matter again, not because it's said, but because it's felt. So if an INFJ suddenly grows quiet in conversations that once animated them, don't assume they've changed. They're just filtering noise from meaning and choosing to save their words for moments that truly deserve the depth they carry. They struggle to articulate what they're feeling. When an INFJ is emotionally overloaded, their inner world becomes so complex that language simply can't keep up. They feel everything, every nuance, every contradiction, every emotional ripple, all at once. It's like trying to describe a thunderstorm while standing in the middle of it. The words exist somewhere, but they're buried beneath the intensity of experience. So when someone asks, "What's wrong?" they freeze, not because they don't want to share, but because they can't translate what's happening inside them into something that makes sense outside. To others, their silence may look like withdrawal, but to the INFJ, it's a storm of sensations: frustration, sadness, empathy, exhaustion, blending together with no clear beginning or end. They know something is off, they can feel it in their chest, but the more they try to explain, the more lost they become in the complexity of it all. It's like trying to untangle 1,000 invisible threads of emotion while the world demands a single sentence. Sometimes they'll downplay it with vague phrases, "I'm fine," or "I just need space." What they really mean is, "I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to speak it without unraveling." They want to be understood, yet the thought of trying to articulate something so layered feels impossible. So they turn inward, where reflection feels safer than expression. Ironically, INFJs are incredible at helping others process emotions. They can find the perfect words for someone else's pain, but when it's their own, everything becomes a blur because they don't just feel their emotions, they analyze, empathize, and absorb them simultaneously. It's too much input for one heart to verbalize. When they finally manage to speak, it often comes out as fragments, poetic, half-finished, emotionally charged, but hard to follow. And if the listener doesn't respond with patience or depth, the INFJ shuts down completely. They decide that silence is safer than misunderstanding. But in that quiet, something powerful happens. They begin to write, to think, to process slowly. They untangle their emotions in solitude, finding meaning in the chaos. And when they return, when they finally have the words, what they share isn't just emotion, it's truth distilled from the storm. Because when an INFJ struggles to speak, it's not because they're empty, it's because their soul is too full to fit into language. They seek solitude but feel lonely within it. When an INFJ becomes emotionally overloaded, solitude calls to them like a safe haven, a quiet retreat from the noise, the energy, the unspoken expectations of the world. They crave it deeply, believing that being alone will bring peace. And for a while it does. The silence soothes them. The stillness feels like oxygen after too much conversation, too much empathy, too much pretending to be okay. But then, somewhere in the quiet, a strange ache begins to grow. It's the loneliness that follows an INFJ wherever they go. The paradox of needing people, yet feeling disconnected from them. They long for someone who understands without explanation, someone who can sit in silence with them and still feel close. Yet, they know how rare that kind of connection is, so instead of reaching out, they stay hidden. They'd rather be lonely alone than misunderstood in company. Inside their solitude, their mind becomes both sanctuary and battlefield. They replay moments, study every word, every tone, every shift of energy that led them here. They try to make sense of why they feel so drained, why they care so deeply, why they can't seem to find balance between closeness and distance. It's not isolation they fear, it's feeling unseen even when surrounded. The irony is that INFJs don't retreat to escape people, they retreat to reconnect with themselves. But when emotional exhaustion runs deep, even solitude stops feeling safe. Their thoughts become louder than the world they were trying to escape. The very space they sought for healing begins to feel like a cage. In those moments, they'll lie awake at night, sensing the contradiction that defines them, needing silence to heal, yet longing for a soul that can understand the silence. It's not sadness exactly, it's a quiet ache for resonance, for someone who doesn't just hear their words, but feels their pauses. And yet, this loneliness also refines them. It teaches them how to sit with themselves, how to find meaning in their own company. Over time, they rediscover a truth they often forget, that solitude isn't punishment. It's the forge where their depth turns into wisdom. Because even when the INFJ feels lonely within their solitude, they're never truly lost. They're simply learning, again, how to return home to themselves. They disconnect from responsibilities to regain inner balance. When an INFJ becomes emotionally overloaded, even the simplest responsibilities start to feel like heavy chains. The texts they haven't answered, the projects waiting for attention, the people who depend on them, all of it begins to blur into background noise. It's not laziness or indifference, it's emotional survival. Their mind becomes so crowded with thoughts and unprocessed feelings that continuing to give becomes impossible without losing themselves completely. So they pull back quietly without warning, messages go unanswered, tasks remain unfinished. The INFJ disappears into silence not because they don't care, but because they care too much and can't carry one more emotional weight without breaking. Their withdrawal isn't rebellion, it's a reset. They step back from the external world to return to their inner one, to sort through the mess the empathy and overstimulation have left behind. They might spend days doing nothing that looks productive. They'll sit by the window, listening to rain, journaling thoughts that don't make sense yet, or simply existing without expectation. This disconnection is their way of remembering who they are beneath the noise of responsibility, a moment to breathe without guilt, to think without interruption, to feel without having to explain. But this detachment comes with a quiet guilt. The INFJ knows people are waiting. They know things are piling up, and yet they also know that forcing themselves to engage before they've rebalanced would only lead to burnout, resentment, or emotional collapse. So they choose solitude, knowing that to give again, they must first restore what's been drained. When they finally reemerge, they do so clearer, lighter, and more grounded. Their empathy returns, but with sharper boundaries. Their focus realigns toward what truly matters. They no longer rush to fix or please. Instead, they move intentionally from a place of calm rather than obligation. This cycle, overwhelm, withdrawal, restoration, is the INFJ's natural rhythm. It's not avoidance, it's healing in disguise. Because when an INFJ disconnects from responsibilities, it isn't about escaping life. It's about remembering that their mind, heart, and soul need rest too, and that balance isn't found by doing more, but by allowing themselves for once to simply be. They crave authenticity and reject surface-level interactions. When INFJs are emotionally overloaded, they lose the patience to pretend. Small talk, fake smiles, and shallow exchanges become unbearable. They crave realness, the kind of connection where silence feels comfortable and truth doesn't need to be sugarcoated. But in a world where most conversations skim the surface, that authenticity feels almost extinct. So the INFJ starts to pull away, not out of arrogance, but self-preservation. They're the kind of people who want to talk about purpose, pain, and healing, not gossip or trends. But when everyone around them seems satisfied with surface-level comfort, they begin to feel like aliens, speaking a language no one else understands. The emotional overload intensifies because they're constantly forced to dilute themselves to fit in, and that contradiction between depth and the shallow eats away at their peace. When they reach their limit, they stop showing up for conversations that feel hollow. They'll nod politely, smile out of habit, but mentally they've already checked out. They start craving solitude over company because silence at least doesn't lie. And in that solitude, they rediscover their own voice, unfiltered, unperformed, free. It's in these quiet moments that INFJs reconnect with what matters: honesty, emotion, and meaning. They journal their truths, pour their hearts into creativity, or lose themselves in nature. Anywhere they can exist without pretending. It's not that they hate people, they just can't stand pretending that small talk fills the void. This rejection of superficiality can make them seem distant or too serious, but in reality, it's the opposite. They just value time and energy too much to waste it on anything less than real connection. They don't need constant conversation, they need resonance. So when an INFJ goes silent in a room full of chatter, it's not detachment, it's discernment. They're protecting their energy from the noise of inauthenticity. And when they finally find someone who speaks with truth, vulnerability, and depth, you'll see their eyes light up again. Because for the INFJ, authenticity isn't a preference, it's oxygen. Without it, they suffocate. They experience emotional reset. When an INFJ reaches their breaking point, when empathy becomes exhaustion and understanding turns into emotional noise, something inside them quietly shuts down. It's not dramatic. There are no tears, no angry outbursts, just an invisible switch. One moment, they're feeling everything. The next, it's as if their heart has gone completely still. This is what an INFJ's emotional reset looks like. It's the mind's way of saying enough. After giving endlessly, listening, absorbing, analyzing, and caring, their system simply overloads. Their empathy, once their greatest gift, becomes a weight that pulls them under. So their subconscious does what it must, it powers down. In this state, the INFJ feels strangely numb. The chaos that once overwhelmed them fades, replaced by a silence that's both comforting and unnerving. They stop reaching out, stop reacting, stop caring about things that used to matter deeply. From the outside, it looks cold, maybe even heartless, but it's not. It's healing in disguise. Their mind is recalibrating, clearing out emotional clutter to rebuild a sense of balance. During this reset, INFJs crave stillness. They might disappear from social life, stop answering calls, or retreat into quiet routines that make sense only to them. Reading, journaling, walking alone at night, these rituals aren't about escape, they're about restoration. It's how they drain the emotional noise and find their way back to clarity. And then slowly, something shifts. The numbness starts to fade, replaced by awareness, small at first, like a flicker in the dark. They start to feel again, but this time differently. Softer, cleaner, more intentional. It's as if they've deleted emotional malware and reinstalled only what's essential. This reset teaches the INFJ one of life's hardest lessons, that they can't save everyone, and they're not supposed to. That peace doesn't come from endless giving, it comes from balance, from choosing when to care, how much to give, and when to step back. By the time they emerge from this state, they're lighter, calmer, stronger, not because they've stopped feeling, but because they've learned to manage the depth of those feelings. The INFJ emotional reset isn't a shutdown, it's a rebirth. Because when they return, they're not the same person who broke down. They're wiser, with quieter eyes, stronger boundaries, and a heart that now loves from strength, not survival. When an INFJ finally reaches the end of their emotional cycle, they don't come back louder, they come back clearer. Their silence has taught them who listens, their solitude has revealed who truly sees them, and their breakdown has rebuilt them into something unshakable. Emotional overload isn't their weakness, it's their cleansing fire. Every withdrawal, every moment of stillness, every quiet night spent overthinking leads them back to one truth. Their sensitivity was never the problem, it was the world that demanded too much of it. If you've ever felt that exhaustion, that moment when caring became too heavy, know this: you're not broken, you're just resetting. And when you return, you'll carry peace where chaos used to live. This is the INFJ way, to fall apart quietly and rise even quieter, but 10 times stronger. Subscribe to Brainy One for more deep emotional psychology about INFJs, intuition, and transformation. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time you hit your emotional reset? Did it change how you see yourself or the world around you?